afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Market Performance and Planning Forum. My name is Brenda Corona here with the Stakeholder Affairs Group. Here, September 29th, 2022. I have here a great group of ISO folks who will be presenting on three major topics. Today, we have this presentation that we posted, and they will have all the information, up-to-date information that we will go over today. But before I begin, I do have a few housekeeping rules to help us work and engage well together for this meeting. As this call is being recorded, please make sure you do not print without the ISO's permission, as well any materials should not be reprinted. The link provided right now from my event producer, Michelle, will direct you to the actual presentation that's posted under user groups and reoccurring meetings, as well for this other hyperlink that we have here. So before we begin, make sure you state your name and affiliation when speaking. We will be monitoring raised hands throughout the call, as well as for those who are in the chat. When you do submit the chat, it will be great if you could provide the name and affiliation of the company you're representing so we can go ahead and read those questions out loud to our group. As well, for today's objective is that we want to make sure we're dialoguing on implementation planning and market performance issues, as well go over 2022 release plans resulting from stakeholder input, as well for supporting the market participants in budget and resource planning, as well for the three main items of implementation, which is to clarify timelines, discuss external impacts, as well do policy discussions should occur for initiative stakeholder process. For today's agenda, we will go first with market performance update by the market analysis and forecasting team. I'll have those speakers make sure to introduce themselves and their roles. And next, we'll have a release update by Trinvo from PMO team. And then at last, at 3 o'clock, we'll have a policy update from Brad Cooper and Jillian Bellinger from the policy team to go over those. So please make sure you keep your comments short and brief. Meanwhile, we are in process of a discussion. We want to make sure we get to everyone's question and utilize the raise hand icon when you can. At this time, I will go ahead and introduce Guillermo Bautista to go over for his team's update for market analysis and forecasting department. Guillermo?
Thank you, Brenda. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for making the time for this afternoon session regarding the update that we have for the third quarter of 2022. We have a variety of topics that we want to cover through this presentation, and there will be different people from the department that are going to be covering different aspects of the deck. I will start indicating that we are working right now on putting together the analysis for the September event. As you know, this has been the most interesting part of the summer, and I think so far is going to be the most interesting part of the year. And we understand there are a lot of questions regarding how different things of the market work, and we understand those, and we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to put all these pieces together. And when we have that, and we will be able to follow the standard process that we have for these summer months, in which we have provided some information on a monthly basis. And let's go to the first slide, Brenda. And obviously, the 2022 is very interesting because this is a time when we broke a record. Can we? Okay, thank you. And for the September 6th, we indeed broke a record for the lifetime of the CAISO system, and we exceeded the 52,000 megawatts. That happened on the evening of September 6th. And when we look at the different months over the years, and we just pick up the last 10, 11 years, we wanted to see how extraordinary that event was. And it looks like it was an outlier. You can see relative to the last summer months of the last 11 years, how different the pattern of the load level distribution looks like. And it's a very simple distribution way to show you historically how the load levels have been for all hours for each of these months, right? And the one on the top on the front, that is on the right-hand side and lower corner, is the distribution for the demand levels that we observed for the September 2022. Well, obviously, this is a partial month because we haven't even completed the month yet, so I believe this contains information up to September 22nd or so. We will update that when we have the full month complete. And just to put that perspective, right, when we see the levels of the maximum loads, you can see that historically they have been way below the 50,000. We have only the event of 2017 when we exceed just by a bit the 50,000 megawatt mark. Prior to that, our record had been in the range of 51,000 or so back in 2006. And with that, we all know that it was a series of events that happened. It was a very challenging condition. In the end, we were able to keep the lights on, and there were many factors at play. We recognize the interest and the importance to tell the story, exactly what happened. And we have seen different elements being discussed sporadically in different places, but we want to have the opportunity to put all together because the complexity of the market shows there are many pieces interplaying and causing some dynamics that unless you look at this holistically, you may not see the whole picture. And with that, let's move to the next slide, please. And I'm just indicating this because I want to give you the expectation of how we are working on this. We are working on putting all these pieces together. And the plan is to leverage on the process that we currently have in place that we implemented since the summer 2021. And that is, effectively, we are generating these monthly reports for the summer conditions, 1 month at a time. Today, we're going to be covering some interest items for the August month. And the expectation is that we're going to have similar report that is going to be posted somewhere in the second half of October. Typically, 1 week after we post the report, we're going to have this public call to go over the main findings and have a discussion with the participants at large. And in general, the report is going to contain the regular structure that we have for the summer report, but obviously, given the specific interest of this period of September, early September, we're going to have a dedicated section to further expand on the analytics and explanation of what really happened in the most critical period of September 5th through September 8th. So please give us a little bit of time. We're almost there, and hopefully in the second half of October we can have all these analysis and discussions of how the events play out for the September heat wave. For that reason, we are not going to be discussing anything specific to September at this point. Everything is related to either the summer or the last few months, as typically we have done for the MPPF. And with that, let's start right up front. And let's move to the next slide, please. What we have done for the summer 2022 is based a lot on what we have implemented since summer 2021. We have these summer enhancements. We did some true-up enhancements in the summer 2022, like adjustments to the logic of the resource efficiency evaluation. But here you have a consolidated list of the enhancements that were purposely designed to tackle summer conditions. Some of them are permanent features. Some of those have a sunset date, like the scheduling priorities. And some of them are going to be triggered based on specific events, like when we have an emergency for energy or we are arming load. And this summarizes effectively what happened for the month. We have a couple of items that may be relevant to what happened in August, and that is effectively one settlement implication, that when we are in these tight supply conditions, we may trigger under an emergency EA1 effectively now with a new logic the incentives for the imports, and that may have been effectively the only one that may have triggered on August 31st, and we put in the report some information regarding that. The dollar involved in that feature showed to be relatively minor. as we will see through the month, in general, the month was quiet. I would say in comparison to September events, any other month is going to be a picnic day. But in relative terms, August was relatively quiet. There were specifically two periods where there was some activity. The first one was when we have this increase of temperatures and corresponding increase of loads in the middle of the month, around August 16, 17. And then as we approach the end of the month, really we start seeing all the heat events unraveling starting since August 31st. And now you know all what happened in the first week of September. So August 31st was not an isolated event, it's just the starting of the whole heat wave event that we experienced in September. And many of the other features are basically there permanently or as sunset, and they were not of a meaningful impact to have something to discuss specifically on those. And with that, I think we're going to cover specific areas for the month of August, and we're going to start first with the portion of the weather and the loads. And for that, I will pass it to Rebecca from our forecasting team. Are you on mute, Rebecca?
I think you're on double muted. Michelle, can you confirm her audio? I see her audio on.
I'm sorry, Brenda. Did you say Guillermo's having problems with his audio?
Rebecca Webb. We want Rebecca Webb. Rebecca, remove your headphones if you can. I think that would also fix that.
Yeah, I can't hear Rebecca. She may need to dial back in. Rebecca, if you need to dial back in, why don't you disconnect and dial back into WebEx, and I'll also send you the phone dialing in.
Yeah, and while Rebecca's diving in, I can jump in as well. This is Amber Motley from the forecasting team as well, while Rebecca's coming back online. So throughout the state in August, we saw above average, much above average, and record warmest temperatures across the west, with a lot of that focus being in the Pacific Northwest sector, also areas of inland southern California. The desert Southwest during this period of time actually saw a little bit of reprieve as they had a heavier monsoon season than they've seen in previous years, which is where at times you see a little bit of below average within that Four Corners region. One thing I will note that has been a constant trend as we go through the summer pattern is that the minimum temperature departures from average through much of the West, this is looking at mean, really are driving some of those mean temperature percentiles. We are seeing above average maximum temperatures as well, but the spread of the above average minimum temperatures was more expansive within August than the maximum temperature departures from average. All right, next slide. One of the things that we do look at is the amount of energy conservation that occurs when a flex alert has been spread out. We had 3 days where a flex alert was called within August 16th, 17th, and 31st. The 31st will be talked about more when we get into the deep dive of the summer analysis with the September report. But for August 17th, we did see some impacts of the energy conservation of about 110 to 275 megawatts. One of the things I will note this year versus previous years is we do have a new demand response program called the ELRP program. So when you look at the observed load plus DR line, which is the yellow dashed line on the graph for August 17th, we will be adding that new program type in. to that observed load plus DR. So the amount of conservation that you see on the system is the amount that is left between the observed load plus DR line, the dashed line, and then that solid blue line, the reconstituted load actuals. So that is where you see the 110 to 275 megawatts of conservation, depending on hour. In August 16th and in August 31st, there was no additional energy conservation observed outside of the programs that were activated. Next slide. And with that, I will pass it, I believe, to Abhishek to go through the different load numbers.
I think he has some technical issues. I will have to take it on. So in the meantime, he's back. Okay. So this other part is about the general performance that we see in the market for the month of August, and we have the regular structure that we have covered in the previous month, and we start with the profile for the demand. August obviously saw a higher load than July. I think it was much lower than the one we observed in September. When we compare this against all the conditions that we have for the month, a typical reference is the CEC forecast that we have projected for the month. That happens to be higher than the actual load forecast and the actual demand that we have in the system. So you can see that we have a healthy headroom between these two references. And in that case, the amount of array showings, as you can see, relative to the CEC forecast, was also in the range of 45,000 megawatts, 46,000 megawatts, and that gives us, I would say, the right amount of supply expected to be able to meet the conditions for the month of August. If we move to the next slide, please. When we unpack a little bit how the array fleet is composed, we do see changes relative to previous month, relative to previous year, because it's an evolving fleet, and we can see that naturally with the hydro conditions that we are experiencing in the West, and that has been quite substantial and persistent, we have seen reduction of arrays supported by hydro resources. That's expected. And we have also seen reductions of the imports. And when we refer to imports here, it's typically the static non-resource specific imports. All those that are pseudo-ties or dynamic resources are classified as part of the other technology types. And what you see on the other end is that this is balanced out with other technologies, and in this case, some of the most relevant trends that we have seen is that as we have more penetration of storage resources, they are really increasing the amount of supported array. In this specific month, relative to the previous year, we can see that storage supported an extra 1,300 megawatts of array capacity. And that is just the composition of the array supply that we have for the month of August. And that is not that different to what we saw for the month of July. Next slide, please. When we move into the prices, and you will see that first, there are two dimensions here. The first one, obviously, it has been for some time the dynamic that we have seen these higher gas prices. I think we have seen that almost for 2 years now, where the prices start to pick up, and they have been in a relatively higher range. I remember the old days where we have the typical gas price anywhere between $3 and $5 per MMBTU. Well, these days it's not surprising to see prices in the range of $15 to $10 per MMBTU. And given the fact that we still have a meaningful amount of generation fleet based on gas, that this gas is going to be incremental in a relatively meaningful frequency of time in the market. Consequently, we expect to see that the electric prices are going to follow a relatively similar trend. In the lower part, you have that trends for the day-ahead prices, and what you see is no more than an increasing trend, largely following the gas prices. And as we go through the end of the month, specifically August 30th and August 31st, we can see that the prices really start to go up, and they went even higher for the month of September. As we will see in September, there were instances in which the bid cap was raised from $1,000 to $2,000, given the import prices that were defining these conditions to trigger. Overall, we have seen this increase in prices. Next slide, please. When we go closer to the operation of the market, even though we have the RA plan, the monthly showings, and we know how much capacity is expected to be based on RA, we have a closer look as we progress towards the operation of the system and the market. The closer view we can have is 1 day in advance, that is the day-ahead market. And we are able to very surgically assess how much capacity is available based on the projected conditions for next day. That is effectively the supply that is available in the day-ahead market. We have this exercise of breaking down that capacity into the two groups, the one that is associated with RA and the one that is above RA. And these are color-coded in the blue and yellow areas. Just to give you a sense, as we progress through the month, how that capacity may vary. The granularity is hourly because obviously we have bids that are based on an hourly condition. We compare that against the load obligation, which is composed by the load forecast that we have for the day-ahead market plus the operating reserves. That will be about 6% of the load level. In addition to that, we have another reference here for the load obligation, which is based on the adjusted load forecast. And this is effectively the load forecast that is consumed into the residual unit commitment process, the ROC process. And in addition to the obligation to meet the operating reserves, and also we account for the self-scheduled exports, those that are high priority, given the fact that we are expecting those to clear at the same level of the priority of the load. And with this, you can really have a very good sense of how the day-ahead market was projecting the supply-demand condition to play for every day of the month. You can see that in terms of the demand, there is a bump in the middle of the month. That is when we have this increase in temperatures that lasted for 2-3 days. And then towards the end of the month, when we start to pick up the demand. And in general, I would say that the RA capacity was sufficient to meet the load obligation. There may be one day in the middle of August where potentially there may have been 1 hour through the ramp that may seem to fall in the green area, and that is more explicitly shown in the report for the graph where we expand on the specific 3 days of the middle of August. But in general, there was sufficient RA capacity to meet the load obligation. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, and this is the one I was referring that when you zoom in into the 3 day of the middle of the August, you can see that the purple line that is just plain load forecast plus the operating reserves falls generally within the blue area that is the RA supply. In August 16, you can see in the ramp down period of our ending 18 or so, there is a little piece of the green area covering the purple trend, but that still gives us a healthy room to be able to meet all the load obligation based on RA supply. But also to highlight the fact that we do have a meaningful portion of capacity that is above RA that is also available to clear in the market in economic basis. Next slide, please. Another area, obviously, that impacts the amount of supply that is available to meet the demand on a day-to-day basis is the amount of outages. What capacity has to be derated or on outage given all the conditions that a generator has to face and in some cases have to go on outage. We don't see completely out of the typical range of the volume of outage that we experience for the month. They are, relatively speaking, the same ballpark as previous months. We will continue to show this for the specific period of the heat wave and see how different that was. You may recall there were some events that afternoon when we start losing some generating units. So we will be able to put that in Next slide, please. Another area of interest, not just for this summer, but overall, is the interplay of intertight schedules. Imports, exports, wheel transactions, reduction of schedules. This one gives you the overall trend of what we call the net interchange. That is effectively the algebraic difference of the imports, the dynamic resources, and minus the exports. And we also break down the component of the wheels. And we try to provide this representation because it is useful to have the context when we talk about imports and exports and wheels, what they really mean. There are many components, many different groups. When people refer to exports in general, they may be just looking at the total number, that would be the lowest value in the negative side, right? And let's say, for instance, for August 30th, we have a maximum export of about 7,500 megawatts. Well, yeah, but there are components that make up that type of export, right? There will be exports that are part of a wheel transaction. Yes, even though they are classified as an export, is the corresponding leg of the wheel. They don't add or subtract capacity to the power balance of the kite, right? It's a pass-through, supply equals demand, and they don't impact the power balance. There will be other exports that are not really to serve external load. For instance, the exports that are associated with ETCs, TORs, and so on. So the fact of giving you this type of breakdown is to really have an appreciation for how these total volumes that typically are referred as total imports or exports are made of. And when we see the trends for August, then we can see that also this black trend that you have with the line is telling you the net interchange for the real time, how that play out when you net the supply side imports and dynamic schedules against exports. And for most of the time, we were able to still have a positive net interchange, meaning a net import position. You can see that they become very low, close to zero actually, around the critical period of August 30th and potentially August 31st, as well as early August. But in general, the net interchange was very healthy. And you can see that for the peak hours, typically when we have the tightest supply conditions, they are anywhere in the range of 5,000 or higher. Let's move to the next slide, please. And this is exactly what I was referring to when we talk about the exports. How are they composed? There are large volumes, over 7,000 megawatts in some cases, but how are they composed? You can see here color-coded. The color may be fading a little bit given the many groups that we have, but in general, you can see that solid through the month, we have about 1,000 megawatts of exports associated with existing transmission rights and transmission ownership rights. There are other components that define the different groups based on the relative scheduling priorities that we have put in place. There could be these exports that are coming straight from the day-ahead market, and they have this priority that we call day-ahead and lower priority or high priority, depending how they were bidding in the day-ahead market. We also have those exports that come straight into the real-time market, which could be either a high priority or low priority. And lastly, we could also have economic bids for exports. In some cases, when the load conditions are not that tight, we do see some volumes of economical exports. Once the supply becomes scarce, we typically see self-schedules, price taker positions for the real-time exports. Next slide, please. Another area of interest when we are talking about the imports has to do with the conditions of the power balance. And we measure the power balance condition, at least in the ROC process, based on the infeasibility. The infeasibility is no more than the amount of megawatts that are produced because of the imbalance between the supply available and the demand that has to be met. those infeasibilities, these rock infeasibilities, can be either under or over. When it is under, that means we don't have enough supply for that specific hour. Sometimes it's not a matter that we don't have the capacity available. In some cases, maybe that the capacity is there, but it cannot be ramped fast enough to meet that specific demand level. But also, there may be other conditions in which we have oversupply, in which we have too much supply relative to the demand that we have to meet. So the convention here for positive or negative in the lower plot reflects whether it is positive, undersupply, too little supply, or oversupply, negative, when we have too much supply. We did observe a couple of days, typically around the peak time of oversupply conditions, and that happens around this critical period of August 16 and 17. Now, we have put two references in the analysis. One is the infeasibility relative to the total requirement that is imposed in the ROC process, which is composed of the, I would say, the standard load forecast plus the operator adjustments to the ROC process. That is like an adder on top of the standard load forecast. We measure that amount of infeasibility, and then we do some math to estimate what would have been the infeasibility against the standard load forecast. And in this case, for August 16, the infeasibility happens only when measured against the adjusted load forecast. That includes the ROC operator adjustments. When we measure that infeasibility against the standard forecast, there is no infeasibility. Now, when we're trying to balance supply and demand, obviously one level that is reached is when we run out of supply to meet the demand, and therefore we're infeasible. One step before, we start reducing the export schedules, starting from the economical, going through the low priority, and if needed, potentially going into the high priority. The upper plot gives you a sense of how frequently, how much we have to rely on reducing exports cleared in the integrated forward market that then have to be reduced in the reliability unit commitment in the ROC process. And the typical days suspects are the same, about in the middle of the month, August 16 and 17, but also August 30th and 31st. And the color code just tells you the magnitude of those cuts based on the type of the priority assigned to those exports. Next slide, please. Another area regarding still the import-export scheduling conditions has to do with the wheel transactions, wheel-through transactions. As you may recall, as part of the summary enhancements, we have this process in which specific scheduling coordinators can come and request for a high priority treatment to certain wheels once they meet certain conditions. And they have to go through that registration process at least 45 days in advance of the first date of the month. So we collect all those registrations, they are assessed and approved or rejected. And once those that are approved, they come into play. They are considered high priority through the system. And this gives you a reference of all the wheels that we have for the month of August. In total, we have about 1,398 megawatts of registered wheels, those that got high priority status when going into the market. And when we compare against what actually was scheduled or bidding into the market, we have that about 30% of all these wheels effectively came into the market at some point in the month. This is the maximum amount that we saw for the month. And the illustration here just gives you a relative sense of the size across the different wheel-through transactions, going from the left, that is the source, and going to the right, that is the sink. And you can see that about a half of that capacity is sourcing from Malin and going to different southwest points such as Palo Verde and Mead. And you have the second point. The highest second point is the knob location that is having about, 25% or so of the total registered wheels going mainly to the mid and to the palo verde. That gives you a relative sense of what are the paths that are mostly utilized and registered for participating in the market. I can tell you that based on the analysis that we have done, given the conditions that we have, these wheel-through transactions were able to flow through. The volume was still modest, 30% of the total amount registered, and there was no curtailment of the wheel-through transactions. Next slide, please. This other one gives you what effectively happened in the market. The previous slide shows you what could potentially happen in terms of registered wheels. This one gives you the daily profile of the actual wheels participating in the market, not only for the high priority transactions, but also for any other, including the ETCs, PORs, because they are some type of wheel-through transactions as well. And you can see that there is a small decreasing trend for the month of August relative to July. And the majority of the wheels through put into the market for the month belong to the high priority. That is the portion in yellow. There is still some volume happening through the month that is depicted with the section in blue that belongs to those that are low priority. Those that didn't register or could not be accepted through the registration process, but still have the opportunity to come into the markets and request for a self-schedule wheel through that happens to have a lower priority than the high priority. Next slide, please. And this is the corresponding one for the real time. Naturally, we have seen that the volumes of the wheel transactions coming in the day-ahead market are going to flow into the HASP, into the real-time market. There may be some small variations coming into the real-time. There is always an opportunity. That is the whole purpose of having the real-time, to have a last opportunity to recalibrate the positions. And therefore, we could see that some participants still have the option and have utilized the option to bid into the real-time directly. Next slide, please. One more item regarding the intertight transactions, and this has to do with the imports that are associated with the RA. And again, this is only referring to static imports, those that are non-resource specific and specific to the California area only. And we have tracked this since last year. There is an expectation that these RA imports are going to be bidding at or below the $0 per megawatt hour. They could indeed self-schedule. They would still meet that expectation. And as you can see through the month, the majority, I would say over 97% of the volume of the static RA imports bid at or below the $0 mark. There may be a couple of days, like at the beginning of the month of August, for instance, where those RA imports were indeed bidding a non-zero or a price above the $0 mark. But in general, we have seen a very good performance in that space. Next slide, please. This other part goes more into a different component, that is storage resources. Given the fast penetration of those resources, given the characteristics to dispatch those resources, we have put an emphasis to track their performance. And the trends that you see here are not that different to what we have shown before. We see still meaningful amount of dispatches for these storage resources in both the day ahead and the real time. We have seen these trends on which they are charging in the early parts of the day when the prices tend to be the lowest, and then they start ramping up for the evening when they start discharging and the prices are potentially the highest. That is a good trend to see, and obviously there will be variations from month to month as the conditions quickly evolve. Next slide, please. The last piece regarding the August report has to do with the cost. Given the explanation I provided earlier that there are higher gas prices, there are higher electric prices, and as we start getting into higher levels of demand, and the consequence is that the wholesale costs are going to naturally increase. Here you have the trend of the wholesale cost that includes the month of August. And as you can see, once you look at the last month of August, you are going to see how that starts to ramp up very quickly given the higher prices, higher demand, and a typical average price for cost for a day would be about 55 or so million. For the last day of the month, that was almost threefold higher, about 150 million. And once you see the September, you're going to see the implications of having these much higher demand levels with increasing prices reflecting the nature of the tight supply conditions in the system. And I think this is the last part for the August report. Can we move to the next slide to make sure I'm not missing any? Yeah, okay. I think this would be a good time to have some questions if there are any or any follow-ups. Michelle.
Hi, Guillermo. We did get a question from Carolyn Kadharian from EMS. It says that during the biweekly calls, problems with the unscheduled flow were mentioned. On the call, it was said that unscheduled flow was going to be discussed today.
Yes, and that is in the section of Congestion of Set, which is in the next section. So I will hold a little bit for that.
No more questions.
Okay, let's move on then to the next section. We have, as you may notice, we keep a very standard tracking of specific areas that are always of interest to the performance of the market. And congestion revenue rights is one of those. And these are very standard methods that we have produced for now over 3 years. And it's interesting just to see how the trends are looking. One general trend you are going to see all over the place when we go into the discussion of congestion has to do with the seasonal conditions. And that means that it is not a surprise that when we go into the late part of the spring, entering into the summer, we do experience higher level of congestion. That is the reality of the system. And when you start to see higher levels of congestion and you combine that with higher energy prices, potentially you start to see other interesting manifestations of the same driver. Here you have the overall balance of the congestion revenue rights, the amount of what is the nominal value of CRRs compared against the CRR deficit, compared against the adjusted CRRs once we account for the deficit, how much surplus is left in the balancing account, and how much money goes back to the low-serving entities after you account for that surplus, plus the auction revenues that go into the system. And there may be some seasonal trends here following the tracking of the higher congestion for the season. And that is, I would say, to some extent expected. Next slide, please. This other area is a counterfactual that we have been providing for a time. And this compares the current settlement logic versus the original full funding logic that we have prior to the policy changes of 2019. Under the full funding logic, the bars in green would be effectively the settlement that would happen for the conditions that we experience for these months. Once we have the new logic, the pro rata funding, effectively this is the revenue or surplus that is allocated to measure demand as part of the balancing account. And that is the expectation that effectively these deficits now are pro rata. They are neutralized through the pro rata process, and any surplus coming from the remaining of the balance is going back to measure demand. Next slide, please. Another metric that we have been tracking is what we have called the auction efficiency, and that is a simple relationship, a simple comparison between the cost of acquiring a congestion revenue right versus the revenue for holding that congestion revenue rights once it's settled in the day-ahead market. And the ratio between these two is depicted here with the dotted line in purple and the markers in purple. Ideally, we would like to see some ratios in the neighborhood of, I don't know, maybe 80% to 100% accounting for any other factor like risk. When we start getting into very low ratios is when we can see that the payouts of the CRRs way much greater than the cost to acquire those CRRs. And this has been one item of discussion for a time before we implemented the product logic. As we enter into the summer conditions and we have increasing levels of congestion, we can see that that divergence increase, and consequently the ratio that we have called the CRS efficiency has reduced. For the month of August, for instance, that ratio was about 50 to 55%, and it could have been as low as almost 25% in the month of June when we observed the highest level of congestion in the day-ahead market. Next slide, please. And this brings us to the overall concept of congestion, right? The CRR is a second step of settling the congestion observed in the day-ahead market. But if we just look at the congestion that accrue in the system, that just gives you a sense of how high, how persistent that congestion was in the system. And here you have the trend based on the congestion rents. And this is the congestion accrue in the day-ahead market that eventually is going back to the CRR holders. But this just gives you a relative sense of the level of congestion that we had in the summer relative to the previous summer, to the previous month. And it has been high. I think overall the congestion observed anywhere between, I would say, late May all the way through July has been relatively higher than usual. Next slide, please. And this just gives you a very specific breakdown for the last 3-4 months. And you can see that the growth of the congestion, the highest level of congestion was observed in the early time frame of the month of June. As we went into the dip of the summer in August, and the levels were relatively milder. Next slide, please. This other one is affecting the monthly CRR payments. Once we have the congestion, once we have to pro rata adjust because there is an imbalance between the money collected from the day-ahead market to the notional value that we have to pay to CRR. This is effectively what has to be paid to the CRR's holders, and that is what allows to remain neutral. We pay up to as much as we have to once we break neutral for the CRR deficits. Next slide, please. Now, we understand that there is a lot of congestion in the system, right? And it's not accruing on one single constraint. This picture is quite busy, but the point is precisely that, to show that there are so many different constraints binding at different times of the summer that each one on its own has its own merit to understand why that congestion was happening. I don't have right now all the details of every single constraint. We do analyze those, we validate those, we understand why they are happening. This just summarizes the fact that depending on what point on time you want to look at, there may be different factors at play that drive the different types of congestions on different constraints. And you can see the variety of the congestion reasons behind all these constraints. Next slide, please. And correspondingly, there will be also a variation of the deficits, because potentially the deficits may accrue on any of these constraints that are experiencing congestion. And that is the reality. That is the approach we took with the implementation of the pro rata funding, that we would take an approach of constraint by constraint. And that is the reason when we go into tracking the deficits, it's going to be as large as the set of constraints that we have with congestion occur, because potentially each one may be resulting in either a surplus or a deficit. That can give you a reference of potential persistent congestion adjustments that we have to do because of the pro rata logic. But as you can see, it's still quite varied from month to month. There are many constraints applicable in each of the corresponding months. Next slide, please. And here is just a small breakdown by the main constraints that we have for leading to the CRR payments. If we want to break down that by constraint, there are a couple of constraints that take the highest share of the lion here. One is the Malin, the other is the knob. In that time frame, we can recall that there were some outages, there is some derated capacity, and that is going to create conditions for these constraints to bind more frequently, because typically they are going to be able to be exhausted. Next slide, please. Okay, let me pause here to see if we have any questions before we move to the next topic. I see one hand raised.
Yes, we do have a question in queue. Caller, your line's unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hey, Guillermo, this is Michelle Quito. Can you go back to page 21?
21. Yes,
Yeah.
Michelle or Brenda, can you go back to that page?
Yeah, thank you. It's the same. Yeah, thank you. So on this, you were saying that 420 of the 6 registered wheels were bid into the day-ahead market. But what portion of these rebid or bid only in the real-time market as LPT wheels?
I don't have the number in front of me, Michelle. I can get it and give it to you. I would say in general, what we have observed is that once they bid into the day ahead and they get cleared into the day ahead, typically we see just the carryover into the real time, meaning whatever already cleared, they transpire effectively the same amount into the real time.
Right, but do you ever have them not bid into the day ahead, but just bid into the real time?
Yeah, it's an interesting method to see. I don't have it in front of me to be able to tell you a number, but we can easily get it for you.
Okay, and then you could just do a real-time wheeling transaction. Alternatively, you could schedule an import and self-schedule an export, right? So it might just be that they didn't use this functionality because they didn't need to be guaranteed, but that doesn't mean that they're actually not wheeling through California, right?
Potentially they can, but that comes with no free risk, right? Because there may be cases where they may not be able to clear in balance if they don't strictly use a wheel, unless they put self-scale, but still they may run in the risk of not clearing in balance.
Okay, I guess in previous presentations, though, I recall that you were telling us that there were effective wheels that were occurring.
Yeah, that may be a discussion that happened prior to this summer, and actually anything that happened prior to August 4th, 2021. And what you're referring to is that prior to the summer enhancement implementation that we did in 2021, we observed this condition that we call implicit wheels. Effectively, and they were trying to make this wheel transaction without using a wheel. And in some cases, it was not their explicit bidding, it was a limitation in our system. So what we call implicit wheels at that time was either they have an import and export transaction that they just didn't match properly by making sure that they have to be in balance, and typically they were able to clear in balance. But there were also other cases in which they bid properly in the day-ahead market as a wheel. Now, when they come into the real time, they didn't bid it at all. They just let the system to basically carry over as a self-schedule into the real time. The limitation that we have in the software back at that time is that if the participant didn't take any active actions to rebid their wheel, and they just let the system to create the self-schedule into the real time, the self-schedule would come into the real time, but without the condition of being a wheel. So it was lost in the carryover from the day ahead to the real time. That was not an explicit bidding activity by the participant. It was a limitation in our software to carry that flag into the real time. and we classify all this as implicit wills. However, let me clarify that once we implemented the summary enhancements after August 4, 2021, that is no longer an issue. If you have to have a will and you want to be treated as a will, you have to explicitly bid as a will and make sure that the feature of balance matching the import with the export has to be in place to be considered as a will. Granted, any participant right now can put an import and an export, and they may try to do some implicit will. We no longer track that. It could be any permutation anywhere, and by the fact that they are not using the will, we cannot go into the assumption what they are trying to do.
Okay, but you could see if these particular resources, I assume that they have scheduling coordinator IDs, you could see if they didn't participate in the day ahead, if they just bid in the real time, right?
Oh yeah, and if they bid in the real time and they bid it as a will, we will be explicitly checking those to be real time wills, yes.
Okay, yeah, so I guess I'm just asking if only you have 30% utilization, but if you also take into consideration the real time bids, I'm curious what the utilization is in that case. So thank you.
Yeah, I would put that metric for September. I think it's a good metric to have.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah. Okay, do you have any other questions, Michelle, Brenda?
Not at this time.
Okay, let's cover this other part, then the continuation of the congestion. Now, we have this concept of day-ahead congestion that is matched with the settlements of congestion revenue rights. Similarly, we have a dynamic in the real time in which we don't have CRS for real time, right? So what we have instead is a settlements calculation that relies on what we call the offset. That is no more than revenue neutrality settlements to ensure that through the settlements of the schedules based on the prices of the real time relative to the day ahead, CAISO remains revenue neutral. And we break down this into two components, the real-time energy offset and the congestion offset. And we have been providing these trends for several years, and just to keep track of this offset because they are meaningful to realize dynamics in the real time. Historically, they have remained at low levels, and there are sometimes when they just increase. Exactly what happened this early summer. I don't recall when I have seen this level of congestion offset in the real-time market that is reaching almost the $80 million mark. And it's quite significant. In relative historical terms, this is a very high congestion offset for a month. And you can see that at least in the range of the time we are covering here, that is the highest. That was followed by similar high levels in other months. Not as high as that, but still relatively high to relative historical terms. In May, for instance, it reached the $30 million, and in August, it has surpassed the $30 million. So it raises the natural question why we are seeing that much congestion offset, right? Next slide, please. This is a more granular breakdown of the last 3 months or so for the congestion offset. And you can see the highest volumes experienced happened to be in the month of June. And it was solid through the month. So the obvious question is going to be what was going on the system during this critical period to have given rise to that much congestion offset. Next slide, please. And as I indicated, there are two components, and I think for the time being, I would like to focus on the congestion offset. Now, how does the congestion offset happen? Well, it's a neutrality calculation to ensure that CAISO is revenue neutral once we settle the real time, and that settlement is like a two-step process comparison of day ahead to the real time, price differential between day ahead and real time, and we separate energy from congestion. This congestion offset, there is a very simple, intuitive way to understand the congestion offset nature, and that is the congestion of set in general is going to be generated anytime we are settling energy in the real time that is associated with differences of transmission from the day ahead to the real time within the real time. So let me put a very simple example. So if we have a constraint in the day ahead market, and we are saying we are going to set a limit of 100 megawatts in the day ahead market, and if that constraint is binding, it's going to be sending a price signal that the transmission capacity is scarce on that specific element. When we come into the real time and the limit is different, let's say 80 megawatts, effectively you can see this as a two-step settlement, right? We bought the energy based on the day ahead at 100 megawatts at a given price. Now we are squeezing that into the real time because we can only get 80. Effectively, we are buying back 20 megawatts at the price differential between day ahead and real time. So we release too much capacity market, or we release too little in the real time market. That differential is going to create these imbalances. So that has a practical meaning when explanation of the congestion of set. In general, we have quite dynamic conditions in the real time. We have discussed for some time in the past the conditions that in the real time the limits may be different. That may be because conditions change, there are outages, but also because in some cases the operators have to actively manage the margin on the constraint. If they are seeing that the market is not tracking properly the actual flows in the constraint and they are getting up to the limit, they need to start creating that margin, bringing that limit within, that constraint within the limit through the market. And one of the mechanisms they have is to rely on this credit reliability margin to true up the flows between the market and what they observe in the real time. That is, in general, the drivers for this congestion of set. Next slide, please. When we go into the month, similar to what I explained for the day ahead market, it's not one single constraint. There may be some dominant constraints that are accruing more share of the congestion of set. It would have to be very tailored as to what period on time we want to analyze to really understand what constraint caused that congestion of set. In general, I think there were several main constraints that are potential for being a main driver for this congestion of set. We have, for instance, this constraint that was created because outages, and there are several contingencies binding. We have seen very high prices indicating that it is expensive to manage that constraint. And there are other two constraints that are of particular interest, and that goes back to Caroline's question earlier today. There are two nomograms listed here. Both of them are referring to the procedure 6110. That is a procedure that applies to the transmission system in the northern part of the system, effectively for the COI constraint. As you may know, there are operational implications to manage flows. The market is the mechanism that we utilize to dispatch the system, and that has implications on how to position resources to manage a specific congestion on different constraints. That is our mechanism to do congestion management. Now, there are different constraints. There may be constraints that are no more than reflecting thermal conditions, right? A line has a temperature limitation, and therefore it cannot flow more than X megawatts or MVA capacity. There may be other constraints that are more like security constraints. When we have an outage, now we have to protect a different line under the assumption that a contingency may happen. So these are more like security constraints. For the month of May, and I believe it happened for a few days in the month of March, there was this constraint introduced in the market to help operators to manage what we call the unscheduled flows. There is an extensive procedure that is at the VA level in which there has to be specific steps taken once there is a declaration of unscheduled flow. Unscheduled flow is beyond the market, is what is actually happen in the system. It's not because of specific dispatches in the market. On the scale flow relates more to the implications of the flows being impacted by other injections somewhere else in the system. And that's the whole point. They are called on scale because these are not part of the schedule flows that we have done through the congestion management. This constraint was precisely put in place to give operators a more efficient way to manage that on scale flows once we are in the condition of the on scale flows that happens only in the real-time operation. This is not a condition that you can project in the day-ahead market. There are no on-schedule flows in the day-ahead market. This is a real-time operation condition. And that is the reason this constraint is specifically designed to take effect in the 5-minute market. That is effectively the one that can give you that congestion management when you are already in the process of on-schedule flows. The complication of this is that obviously the constraint is not in the day-ahead market. There is a proxy constraint that was utilized in the 15-minute market, and it's a proxy because it's not exactly the same constraint. And that is the other nomogram that is listed there. And in some cases, that proxy constraint will work in the 15-minute market. And there is still a lot of discussions to happen potentially for the next season that involves other entities that have to do with on-schedule flows. This is not just a discussion within the CAISO. And to see how we can better align, how we can better assess this condition and align the markets better, because right now this constraint is specific to the 5-minute market. We don't have a specific number of how much of that constraint, of that congestion of set accrue on this specific constraint. And there may be some ways to do some assessment of the dollars associated with that constraint. We haven't completed that analysis. I just want to give you the practical nuances of what's going on to have resulted in this level of congestion of sets. So I think that is the only slide that I have for this component. Can we move just one slide to make sure I'm not missing anything on this topic? Yes, okay. So I think this is a good time for questions now, please.
Yes, Guillermo, we have Joshua Arnold from PG&E. He can go first. Let's get his online muted. Go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, Guillermo. Josh Arnold. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, Joshua.
Oh, okay, great. Guillermo, I am a little concerned about the magnitude of the RTCO in June. I mean, obviously things happen in real time that cannot be anticipated, and there's always a lag. You know, you can have 2 or 3 days of a problem that cannot be captured in the day ahead simply because of timing. My concern, though, is that the RTCO was consistently high day over day over day in June. And it seems that something, and I may be completely wrong, but it almost seems like something could have been anticipated in the day ahead after the first week of incredibly elevated RTCO values. Or maybe it couldn't be, but it just seems like every single day, pretty much of June, was well in excess of a normal RTCO value. And it just seems really abnormal that we couldn't have picked that up somehow.
Yeah, and I think you have a very good recollection of the overall process, Joshua, because when we always try to align markets, right? We understand the need to have aligned markets between day ahead and real time. Otherwise, any misalignment, and actually it's not just day ahead and real time, it's CRRs versus day ahead and day ahead versus real time. We understand the efficiency to have these markets well aligned. And you are right, and we do have processes and expectations that once you start to see a condition developing in the real time, that we try to realign the day ahead market properly to close the gap, right? And that is the reason I was trying to give this preamble in the explanation, because this specific constraint is specifically designed to handle on schedule flows. On schedule flows is only a reality in the real-time operation. There is no on schedule flows to manage in the day-ahead market. Indeed, potentially we could enforce the very same constraint and nothing is going to happen because this is on schedule flows. It's anything that is already beyond what the market already is scheduled. trying to have this constraint in the real time is simply to try to have a better handle of the on-scale flow that happens inherently only in the real time. That is the challenge. So there is still a lot of discussion of what we can do, right, to try to realign markets in any way, and that is still an open discussion we have to go for the next season.
Okay, that actually does sound reasonable. I was just trying to figure out if it was just a frequency gap or it was a different constraint every day, but no, that sounds reasonable. And before I go, I did want to give you a comment on your initial slides with the load numbers by month for the 10 years going back to the summer. That was absolutely beautiful. I would love you guys to keep that going forward. I sent that around to my settlement peers here at PG&E, and it tells a story in one image. I really want to thank you guys for that. That was just absolutely beautiful to see.
Oh, thank you for the comment, Trisha. Okay, let's go to the next question.
Yes, we have Seth Cochran from DC Energy, and your line is unmuted. Seth, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just picking up a little bit more on the unscheduled flows. Guillermo, are you saying that it's not you're not able to model that 6110 COI NS in the day ahead market just because is it because you can't see it when you model in the day ahead and you just see it manifest itself in real time, so that there's really nothing you can do, or is that?
Yeah. Let me try to explain in a different way. I think one item is the driver, and a different item is the mechanism you have to internalize that. We have no limitations to model that constraint in the market per se. There is nothing that would be a challenge for us to model that constraint in the day-ahead market, but I'm talking about the mechanism. It's not about that. The challenge here is what we are trying to achieve with that constraint. And what we're trying to achieve here is not to do congestion management for a market condition. I think that is the hard part to come across. The on-scale flow happens out of our control, right? You have, let's say, on-scale flow in Mali, and that may be because somebody, I don't want to put names, somebody far away in another balancing area is putting a transaction that now part of that transaction is coming through Mali. Not because they designed it that way, because it's just the physics of the system, right? If you inject something there and you have a mesh load to the system, you cannot control exactly how the Kirchhoff laws are going to work, and some flow may come in other constraints that can be impacted. And when you have this meaningful path that build the backbone of the west system, Malin is going to be one of those that are typically impacted. So these on-scale flows have to be managed, right? They pose a reliability condition. You cannot exceed the limits, and right there you are working to mitigate for that on-scale flow in the real time. So trying to position system conditions, resources in the day-ahead market is going to do nothing to manage the on-scale flow in the real time, because it's not something that you are controlling. It's not generated from the conditions in your system. It's external to your system, and it's happening in the real time. So trying to enforce this constraint the day ahead is not going to give you any solution for the issue that is happening in the real time. That is the challenge.
Okay, fair enough. But you can, in some way, limit the capacity that you're selling in the day-ahead market that would account for the loop flows that are manifesting and constraining in real time to avoid the real-time congestion offset. Like it sounds like that's possible.
Oh yeah, potentially that would be a very interesting discussion, right? Do we want to make room in our share of the constraint to accommodate on-scale flows that may be not even driven by conditions in the CAISO system? That would be a very big discussion to happen.
Okay, and today, how does the CAISO account for loop flow or unscheduled flows in the day-ahead model? Do you try to limit the capacity to account for those today, or you just totally just wait to see what happens in real time and don't try to account for that in their day-ahead models?
Yeah, we don't tackle explicitly on the schedule flows. What we try to do is not to reduce the limits. They stay what they are, but we try to internalize in our network model the potential flows that may come from different balancing areas when they are trying to meet their power balance of condition. These are not strictly on schedule flows. This is a projection of the supply demand conditions that are going to be across the different balancing areas, what we call base schedules, and that is going to give us a reference for the day ahead. That is a historical reference to account for that interaction. But what I'm talking about here is really what realizes in the real time, right? If right now it's going to be on a scale of 100 megawatts because some other transaction happens beyond our boundaries, you know that until it's really happening or close to the real-time operation. So going back to my point that trying to make that and management through the day-ahead market with our own resources is not the solution, right? Because it's not an issue generated by how we dispatch our resources.
Okay, thank you. Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I think
all right.
I don't know if
we have one more.
Yeah.
Michelle Keto from CPUC, your line should be unmuted. Go ahead.
Hey, Guillermo, this is Michelle. Just one sort of additional clarification. So if you're having day-over-day unscheduled flows, doesn't it seem like you should be able to figure out why it's occurring? It doesn't seem surprising at that point. That's one question. So do we know the source of it? And then I have another question. Or can you figure out the source of it?
The answer may be very generic and trivial, Michelle, and I don't mean to be demeaning in any sense, but the cause could be any scheduling happening outside our windows. We do not have visibility. We see the effect, right? And that is the reason something that has to be managed through these procedures. So we really cannot pinpoint, at least on the case of walls, where or why that on scale flow is happening. It's part of the overall interaction of this interconnected network in the West.
Okay, so I guess my second point or question is given that, it's not because anything CAISO load is doing it, it seems like a very expensive externality coming from another balancing authority, right?
Yeah, I see your point. I wouldn't point to one specific area, and that is part of the challenge, right? We really don't know where the origination is. All what we know is that it's coming through our system. Now, I can tell you the opposite can also happen, right? That our own scales are creating on a scale flow somewhere else. So it's a price of having an interconnected network that have to follow the physics, the laws of physics rather than the scheduling laws.
Okay. Just one more point. I mean, I get the RC West notices, and it seems like there are some very specific lines that very frequently have unscheduled flows, right? This doesn't happen all over the system. There are like 2 lines, right?
Yeah, typically I would say Malin, and there may be 1, 2 other patterns where we may observe that, yes.
Okay, thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Okay, let's move on to the next section, and this is very plain. I think we have discussed to some extent this information. This is just to give you the transparency of how the prices consumed into the markets are trending, right? And you can see if you go back to March 2020, where the prices were way below the $5 versus what we observed in August and even September that reach or even past the $15 mark, and this is the so-called city gate, that is the southern part of the system. The next one, please, is going to be the same trend, but that is for PG&E. Interesting enough that this is telling you something bigger, right? That is not just a condition in the southern part of the system. Historically, I remember we have seen some type of price separation between PG&E and so-called areas, right? Well, in this case, there may be still some price separation, but you can see that still the northern part of the system continues to see this corresponding increase in trend. Next slide, please. This obviously is going to impact to some extent the prices. This is the trend of the prices across the markets, and we can see that on average the prices have trended up, and they are going to be way higher in September. Next slide, please. And this is just the settlement, the wholesale cost of the market, and broken out by quarter is total cost. And just to give you a reference of how pricey the market has been given all the conditions that we have. And just for the quarter two, that is July through August, we are in the mark of $4 billion. Next one, please. And batteries. And there is no very specific information I want to share. It's just to provide you the generic trend that we have seen for batteries for the last few months, and for energy, for AS. And you can just keep going forward, please. And I would like just to finalize this section of the market with a couple of items that we want to show you for what we call the transparency of market issues. One of the processes we have in the CAISO is about tracking all the issues that we identified through the different processes that we have, validation of prices, tracking of performance. Eventually, we end up with this list of market issues. Some of those may require some policy redefinition of certain aspects of the market. Some of them may require some fixes because something didn't work properly. And once we reach certain level of maturity on the understanding of the problem, we want to give you that transparency, what the issue was, what we are doing, or what we plan to do. So this small section is to give you the transparency of 3 items. And with that, I will pass it to Jenny.
Thanks, Guillermo. Hi, everyone. This is Jenny Araj. So I'll review the few issues we have here. The first one is called hybrid resource mitigation. So in December of last year, we filed our tariff initiative for the hybrid resources stakeholder process, and we split that initiative into 2 phases. 2A became effective in December, and in that tariff language, it said that hybrid resources should be exempt from our market power mitigation. In April of this year, we identified that we were mitigating bids for resources that were classified as hybrid. So we had a miscategorization of them in our master file. We did update those flags so that those resources would now be exempt from mitigation. We don't plan on resettling those events. If you could go to the next slide. So just to give some numbers around the issue, it only lasted from December 15, 2021 through April 28th of 2022, and we had about 20 hybrid resources impacted. We did an analysis and found that it was only 2.5% of the market intervals when these resources were mitigated. And that doesn't include whether they were committed or dispatched. So that's just the mitigation that they saw. We have improved our business processes internally to better identify hybrid resources and set their flags correctly to exempt them from the mitigation. And we will have a more permanent fix later this year when we implement phase 2B and we have a formal categorization of these types of resources. Another issue that came up in our validation, we'll call this flex ramp eligibility. So our ISO tariff says that anybody that has an economic bid in our real-time market is eligible for a flex ramp award. We found from the period of 2016 to 2021, again, we had master file flags that were set incorrectly for VERS, proxy demand resources, reliability, RDRs, HyGens, and storage resources. These resources should have been eligible for flex ramp awards, but were set to be ineligible. Next slide. And so we have self-reported this issue to FERC as the other issue to the hybrid resource. We've looked at the financial impact of this issue. As many of you know, our flex ramp prices in the 15-minute and 5-minute market are quite often zero, so it's a small dollar impact. One final item I wanted to go over, and we sent out a market notice last month about this and also put in a BPM PRR change. We made a change to our marginal loss sensitivity calculation, and so this calculation determines like the loss component of the LMPs, and so it's a calculation to determine the incremental change in losses due to an incremental injection at a specific point. The current approach, or the approach before August, has always been to use a single slack bus for the incremental slack location for the loss sensitivities, and then convert it to a distributed load slack basis. The new approach that we implemented was to maintain the net schedule interchange as fixed for each balancing area. This better accounts for the imports in and out of the balancing area, and then doesn't mess with our loss calculation. And so we implemented this approach on August 22nd, and we've seen good results since then. I'd like to open it up for any questions on these transparency issues.
No questions at this time, Jenny.
Oh, excellent.
Okay, and just to create expectation, typically this is where we stop. The reminder of the deck is just information for your reference. We continue to generate a standard set of metrics, but we don't typically go through those. If there are any specific questions, we may be able to take it for homework. And with this, we would be ready to move to the next section, Brenda. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Trang. Can we check audio for you?
Hi, Brenda. I'm here.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon. This is Trang Vo from Strategic Initiative Management in the Enterprise Program Management Office, and I'll give a brief update on the release plan today with a focus on the fall 2022 release. All right. As usual, we'll start with our release plan summary for the remaining initiatives for fall 2022 and the independent 2022 efforts for this year. So for fall 2022, we have our familiar initiatives here for flexible ramping product improvement deliverability, as well as the associated enhancements. And then we have hybrid resources phase 2B, reliability demand response resource bidding enhancements phase 2, and the central procurement entity implementation. What we have remaining for our independent efforts are going to be our set of enhancements for operation systems improvements, and then our WEIM enhancements for ETSR UI and the shared ramping constraint, which actually moves to 2023, but we'll leave that here as we wrap up the ETSR UI effort. Just as a reminder, that one will move to 2023. You can go to the next slide. All right, for 2023, we have our WEIM Spring 2023 onboarding of our new entities for Avangrid, El Paso Electric, and the WAPA Desert Southwest region. And I'd like to take a moment here just to remind folks too that we are still working through a feasibility and implementation assessment for efforts past 2022 into 2023. So you'll see that right now our 2023 implementation plan is very light from this perspective, but as many of you know and are following along, we are having many stakeholder initiatives that we're engaging with you on, and we encourage you to follow along with those stakeholder initiative processes. And another item and recurring initiative stakeholder process is the budget planning that also has a summary of candidates coming up past 2022 for our work, and the next update and milestone there for the budget planning will be the October board meeting, where you can see a more certain list of the candidates coming up after 2022. Okay, so we'll continue to include those into the RUG as we have more details and certainty around the implementation, and then we'll communicate accordingly in the following RUGs. All right, so we'll have some transparency enhancements and reminders here. So we did put together a few slides starting this year to present in the MPPF for our transparency enhancements. So there's no major changes, but just a reminder of what is available for you that has been implemented for transparency. So here we have a collection of items on the CAISO website, including today's Outlook. And so these are either completed or ongoing, and you can reference those in the locations that are included in the summary. Don't have any new data there, but just a reminder to take advantage of that additional information. Go to the next slide. All right, so here we have a couple more website enhancements, and then you can see starting for the first one that we're still working through the IPE data transparency items from RIM. For the second website item, you can see that that was already implemented and the references there for you to access. So we'll go into the reporting systems. For OASIS, you can see that we have the locations of the reports for the transparency items that we implemented for the summer of this year. And then for CMRI, that was also included and implemented as of this summer. So no additional changes besides just the locations there. So let's go on to the final slide here. All right, so we have a couple more OASIS items that we added the details for how to access on the OASIS UI. Those were implemented and have data as of the summer implementation. And then the remaining two items are completed for the CAISO website, today's Outlook, and ISO Today mobile app. All right, so on to fall 2022. So we're going to spend most of our time here on the overview, as this captures the relevant information for what's completed and upcoming for fall 2022. So I want to step back and just remind folks that we did recently announce that for the fall 2022 release, our activation has moved from November 1st to December 1st. That applies specifically to our hybrid resources phase 2B activation, which has the first of the month activation, and then FRP improvement deliverability, which also has that first of the month dependency due to the settlement changes. For RDRR phase 2, just to clarify, we have filed for an activation between November 1st and December 1st with some flexibility to activate when we're ready within that window. So we have a by 12/1 activation for RDRR. That is just to reflect that, again, there's no first of the month dependency, and so we may be able to activate that sooner pending the FERC response. And CPE is also an outlier here, where CPE, as it's related to the RA year, we do have master file and SIRA deployments planned for the middle of October in order to support the data submissions for the effective RA year of 2023 starting January 1st. So just an overview for production activation there. And then I'm going to actually back up and announce what our main focus is. So right now we are working through, again, getting the market sim underway for the remaining fall 2022 initiative. So CPE at the bottom, the last item, that one is currently in market simulation. And for hybrid resources, FRP and RDRR, we do have our twice weekly market simulation calls where we are providing the latest information. So as of today, and this morning's market simulation call for those that were tuned into that, we will be starting market simulation for hybrid FRP and RDRR October 10th now, with specific trade dates again identified in the market simulation calls. But that week is when we plan to execute the scenarios for and open up the market simulation for all three of those initiatives. Okay, and I'm going to move backward. I'm sorry. Can we go back to the matrix, please? All right. So when it comes to external training, so most of that has been complete, including additional sessions for hybrid resources 2B. So we added a session for the metering requirements that we completed on September 26th. We have an additional discussion to cover the same content and address any questions that we do receive since the last metering discussion. So that will be on October 6th, where we'll cover more topics related to the metering requirements. And I'm going to step back to BPMs. And so for BPMs, you should see that the ones for the PRRs for FRP should be available. And for central procurement entity implementation, the settlement BPM has already been published, and then the reliability requirements one is expected by the end of October. And then back to the tariff section. So what's upcoming for tariff activities is that for FRP and RDRR, we do have pending responses that we'll expect from FERC in the middle of October. And then I think no updates on tech specs and config guides or BRF here. So I actually do want to stop at this time to take any additional questions or comments on the fall 2022 release overall or the independent initiative. And Brenda, if you can just confirm if you see anything on your side, that'd be great.
There's no questions in queue.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Okay, then let's go briefly through the individual slides for each of the initiatives for fall. Okay, let's go to the next slide for hybrid resources 2B. Again, this shows the milestones that have been completed and what's upcoming. So what's remaining here really is going to be the execution of the market simulation and then our production activation. So let's go on to the next milestone table for FRP. Okay. All right, so for FRP, you'll see, so this actually, the metering requirements that's listed under training should be under the hybrid project. So we'll move that accordingly. So what's upcoming for FRP really is just market sim and production activation here. Okay. Go to the next milestone table. All right, so for RDRR, we have moved this market simulation to start the week of October 10th, and what's remaining there again is going to be the FERC response and then the market simulation and production activation. All right, and let's go to the final milestone table. Okay, so we are currently in market simulation for central procurement entity implementation. Our next milestone will be the deployment of master file and Sierra into production mid-October, and then the full activation for the January 1st RA year for 2023. Okay. All right. Move on to independent. Okay, so for OSI here, again, the latest BRS is available as of August 12th. So let's go on to the next slide where we do have some updates. Okay, so we've been eagerly waiting for some of this functionality to move into the map stage environment so that we can start our unstructured simulation. So I'm happy to report that for the two ADS items here that you see highlighted, we are planning to move those to map stage tomorrow and get those ready for the unstructured market simulation to start sometime the week after. So we're looking at the first week of October for the start of that unstructured market simulation. And then for training and the production availability of these, the dates are still to be determined. That's going to depend on the remaining testing that we have. And those are the main updates there. And then for the last item for modify unit details for the UI, again, we're going to move that to 2023. And we'll revisit and have more timelines, more specific timelines associated with that at a later time. So let's go on to the RC items under this on the next slide. All right, so no changes to the RC portal items. Again, we do plan the training materials and release notes October 10th with the production availability of those changes a week later, October 17th. Let's go to the final slide for the WEIM enhancements. All right, So for these ones, no change on the scope. We're just providing general timelines here, and I know that we're covering this as part of the WEIM biweekly operations meeting. So for those that are directly impacted, more details are provided there, and we look forward to more feedback in coordination with you on these. For the ETSR item, that is still planned for the end of this year. And for the shared ramping constraint, again, we are moving that past fall 2022 release into 2023. So because that is a significant change, we're going to move that work out to be after the fall release effort and FRP specifically, and then resume that effort to or we're going to continue that effort with a plan to implement in 2023. All right. And we can stop right here because the following slides in the release plan update refer to CRR and settlements upgrade, which are a little bit longer term. And I just wanted to remind folks that for CRR, we do have customer partnership group meetings that are currently covering and taking in feedback for the CRR upgrade. And then for settlements replacement, we're covering that at a high level at the settlement user group now. And as we get closer to the implementation, we will report out more regularly on these. So I'll stop one more time for any additional questions or comments.
There are currently no questions in queue.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Then I am all set, and you can skip through the rest of these slides. Thanks.
Thank you, Trang. So yes, we will skip over these. And now I will go ahead and introduce Brad Cooper, Senior Manager, Policy Integration and Governance. Brad, go ahead. Testing audio first.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So this is the policy update, which I'll go through our active initiatives and what the status of all of them are. So go to the first slide. And then, so on each of these slides, I have a brief description of the scope, and then people like to know the ISO governance's decisional classification, whether it's substance under the board or if it's going to be joint authority with the governing body. So we list that, and then we list the status. So this interconnection process enhancements, there was an earlier phase of it that was completed earlier this year, and now the second part, which are these broader process reforms in the interconnection process, is due to go to the board coming up this month, and this is ISO interconnection stuff, so it's just CalISO board only. So next slide, please. And these are roughly in order of when they would be coming to conclusion and going for governance approval. This Washington WEIM greenhouse gas enhancements, there are various market enhancements to support Washington EIM entities with the reporting of WEIM transactions under Washington's greenhouse gas regulations. These are fairly, as far as tariff changes, I believe these are fairly limited changes, mostly changes to the default energy bids to incorporate Washington greenhouse gas costs. Although, as part of the initiative, we are proposing to develop some enhanced reporting or information provision to market participants. And so that revised draft final proposal was recently posted on the 22nd, and this is also going to the October CalISO board and WEIM governing body meetings. Since this is a WEIM item, it's under the joint WEIM governing body board approval authority. Next slide, please. And then finally, I think this wraps it up for the for the October governance meetings, the WEIM Resource Efficiency Evaluation Enhancements Phase 2. It's addressing how to tag low priority exports from the CALISO and clarifying the scheduling priorities within the hour, adjusting the CALISO's RSE obligations to account for low priority exports, how they can clear against WEIM transfers. And then this what's called WEIM, and I should have edited this slide. We're not calling it Emergency Energy Assistance anymore. We're calling it WEIM Assistance Energy, which is providing for a BAA that fails the RSE to receive transfers or transfers greater than its last amount at a additional cost that would then be allocated out to other BAAs. And then these last two items were considered in the initiative, but we're not proposing any changes. This initiative falls under the joint board governing body authority, except for the export tagging rules, which are under the governing body's advisory role. We're working. We recently put out revised draft final proposal earlier this month, and then we'll be posting a final proposal on September 30th, which is a very limited change. It's going to say that we're not going to, by default, we're not going to propose to, by default, opt in the CALISO BAA to be eligible to receive this WEIM energy assistance because of several issues that are unique to the BAA, given that we have multiple LSEs and we're in the day-ahead market, and we would we'll defer consideration of that to a subsequent stakeholder process. And like I said, we're planning to take that to the board and the governing body this month. Next slide, please. Then, this capacity procurement mechanism, track 1, this addresses various enhancements for the capacity procurement mechanism, which is how the CALISO BAA procures additional capacity. Since this is only a CALISO BAA thing, it would be under CALISO board only. The draft final proposal is posted September 16th, and we plan to bring this to the December board meeting. Next slide, please. The energy storage enhancements, which consists of a number of changes to how energy storage enhancements works in the CALISO markets, and you'll see on the following slide that some of that has been spun off into another initiative. That was recently delayed until the December board meeting. Originally, it was supposed to go in October, and we're planning to post a final proposal in October and then go to the December board meeting. I think I just said that, and that this is under the joint governance authority. And then this storage modeling enhancements is the initiative that was spun off from the previous initiative to focus on broader enhancements to our market storage energy, into broader enhancements to our market's energy storage models. This would be under the joint authority, and we won't be starting this off till beginning of next year, having some workshops, and then hopefully completed by the end of next year. Next slide, please. Then related to storage is this ancillary service state of charge constraint. This is a follow-up to our recent quote-unquote emergency tariff amendment about issues related to the ancillary service sort of state of charge constraint and how that interacts with bid cost recovery. We haven't yet looked into the decisional classification for this, and we're proposing to put out a straw proposal next month, and we don't have a schedule past that. We'll see how things go after we put out our straw proposal. Next slide, please. And the day-ahead market enhancements, or DAME, it's developing what we're terming the imbalanced reserve product, which would reserve capacity in the day-ahead market to be available in real time. It would be co-optimized in the IFM along with demand bids, and then we would also be making some changes to the residual unit commitment or the RUC process, notably a downward RUC product, in addition to the current RUC product that's only in the upward direction. Now for decisional classification, this one gets complicated, and so it says partially WEI and everybody advisory, partially joint. We're considering this classification further. You'll see later that the EDAM that it's been determined that we're going to recommend that the board make that under joint authority. So this one may well turn out the same way. We've had a number of workshops and MSC discussions since September. I think we've had them before September also. And anyway, we're planning to come out with a fourth revised straw proposal shortly, and then give a briefing at the December joint meeting, which, depending on how things land, might not be a final decision. It might just be a briefing. That's why I put the word briefing on there. Next slide, please. Yeah, our RA Phase 2, much of that, some of the scope of that was addressing RA must offer requirements and changes to RA requirements as part of that would be needed in coordination with day-ahead market enhancements. We've ended up addressing most of that in the day-ahead market enhancements. And then this initiative was also covering some other RA topics like enhancing must offer obligations for certain resources and some other kind of administrative changes. And you see that we last posted the straw proposal on this since last October, and not much has happened on this initiative since then. These remaining RA items, we're working on our roadmap for next year, and these may well be incorporated into a broader RA initiative. Next slide, please. And then extended day-ahead market, or EDAM, which sure everyone knows about. That's explaining the day-ahead market to current participants or new participants, I guess, in the WEIN. We're addressing, these main topics listed here along with others. And like I said, it's been proposed that the EIM initiative fall under the joint board, EIM governing body, joint authority. We've had a lot of action on this initiative, and planning on a draft final proposal October 26th with at the minimum a briefing at the December CalISO board and EIM governing body joint meeting. I guess I'll take questions at the end. I know I'm kind of going through these kind of quick. There's the Transmission Services and Market Scheduling Priorities Initiative, which we internally we call it the Wheeling Initiative. There was an initial phase of it that looked at export schedules from non-RA resources, and we filed some stuff in the first phase of this with FERC earlier this year. The remaining part of this initiative is a process for wheeling transactions through the CalISO BAA to obtain high priority scheduling rights. This would be WEIM governing body advisory. I need to double check on that. I could double check that we could correct the slide. That may not be correct. Oh no, excuse me. Yes, I believe that's correct. I'm sorry, I was reading joint authority. Yeah, so this would be WEIM governing, and it looks like I'm leaving a body out of there. WEIM governing body advisory. Like I said, we filed an earlier phase of this, which was approved by FERC back March. We're looking at posting revised straw proposal early November, and then giving a briefing at the December joint board and governing body meeting. Next slide, please. And then price formation enhancements. This is looking at a number of topics, scarcity pricing enhancements, fast start pricing, some changes potentially related to storage and the multi-interval optimization, local market power mitigation changes, and then potentially other items. We've had some workshops on this already, following an issue paper we posted. And so we're planning some additional workshops on discrete topics in October and December, as listed there. And then sometime later in 2023, I listed mid there, that we would bring things to a joint CalISO board and governing body meeting. And yeah, I might have jumped. This decisional classification is listed as advisory. Yeah, no, I think that's right. So what's tripping me up is this probably shouldn't have said joint meeting at the bottom. But then, this initiative is in an early stage of development, so the decisional classification could change. So that very last sub bullet, which says mid-2023 joint CalISO board, it probably shouldn't say joint there. Apologize. And next slide, please. Yeah, this is another initiative that we kicked off on April, but it's been on hold till we get some additional software. It has to do with how shift factors are modeled in the CalISO market, and then we also put in there a procedure for if we need to change penalty prices, which FERC has directed us to put in the tariff, a procedure for us to change them on a emergency basis that we had proposed to FERC before. They turned us down on procedural grounds, I believe it was. They said that we couldn't file it and that we couldn't make those changes in the proceeding that we tried to. So we're putting them in this initiative. So in any case, this initiative is largely on hold until we get some software enhancements, which I believe should be coming up around now. And so there should be some activity starting back up in this. And then one more slide, if I have it, or this might be the last one. Yep, this last one, so I can answer questions.
Thank you, Brad. We do have 3 questions in queue. Alva Zapota from PG&E, go first.
Brad, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Alva. How are you doing?
Thank you. Good, thank you. So obviously the one we're curious about, going all the way back to page 133, is this identification of ancillary service state of charge constraint as an initiative now, which I'm glad to see, but I wonder if you could describe a little more what we might expect out of that. We were fairly concerned with the approach that was taken. I understand that you agreed with the DMM that it was an emergency. I'm not sure we were as convinced it was an emergency, but nevertheless, the solution seemed draconian, and so just wondering what you're considering there.
Yeah, Alva, I'm not real involved in that initiative, so I believe we are going to propose a preferred approach and some alternatives, but I apologize, I'm not remembering if we have another preferred approach yet, and maybe we're still talking about that. So I apologize. I can't preview you what we're going to propose in that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. But I'm wondering whether, so the only setting in which we thought comments could really be made on this was essentially at FERC itself. Do you think there should be any opportunity for market participants to weigh in on this before you provide it since it sounds like whatever proposal is going to be come up with is not going to be definite, is there any reason or possibly some venue where comments could be made directly to CAISO on the that initiative?
I don't believe. I mean, we're always welcome to get to hear from people. As I don't believe there is any way to do like formal comments until we start an initiative. Although, and then I know. And then we were talking through this the other day. I believe FERC's order comes out after, like it would be November, right? Mm-hmm. Early November, which would be after we come out with this. And so I know there was some discussion about whether we should wait till FERC's order or not. I believe we landed is we could go out and propose something and then whatever FERC says could, it could change our thoughts after we put that out.
Right.
Okay. And other than that MSC meeting.
Right. That was where the information was essentially presented, I'm sure we and other market participants would like to work with you on a collegial basis on this, rather than having to, essentially we're almost forced into, because you've taken it to tariff directly and to FERC, it almost forces a kind of an adversarial point of view on opposing what you've done, and I wish it could be done in a more collaborative form, and perhaps that would help prior to the FERC decision, actually. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll mention that to the storage team, but
thanks. Appreciate that.
And the time is clicking on FERC now, so everybody needs to say their views in the FERC proceeding. In any case,
I guess that's the way. Thank you, and thank you for that as well. And I think we really appreciate the fact that you defined this as an initiative now. So thank you for that too, Brad.
Sure.
Next, we have Dan Williams from CES. Your line's unmuted. Go ahead, Dan.
Hey, Brad. Dan from Customized Energy Solutions here. A couple quick questions. First, on the price formation initiative, Guillermo said that his team would have the review of the September heat wave outcomes out kind of in that late October timeframe. I think it's possible to align the price formation initiative workshop with takeaways and discussion that we're going to have coming out of that September analysis?
Yeah, well, what are you suggesting? I mean, the analysis should be out by the time of that initiative, I believe. I think we're planning on early October, so we certainly can consider the results of that in the discussions we have on October 21st.
Okay. That sounds good. And then it's kind of similar question. I just saw the notice come out on the Resource Efficiency Enhancements Evaluation Phase 2 final proposal and call coming up on October 6th. Is there any possibility that, or do you already have planned to have some discussion of resource efficiency outcomes from the kind of early September events, kind of relative to where the case has gone with the final proposal for Phase 2? I know we're on a pretty fast track for that initiative, but it may be good just to speak to that a little bit if possible.
Yeah, I don't know. So for that call we're going to have next week, we're only making one limited change in our proposal, which applies just to the California ISO BAA, just that we'll have a stakeholder process with our LSEs to decide if they want to opt in or not, and see if there's any other changes we could make. So I don't think we'll be prepared to discuss resource efficiency evaluation changes then. I don't think the September events really, are real directly related to anything we're proposing as far as this Phase 2. But I would say that there is a number of resource efficiency evaluation topics kind of still outstanding, and there may well be more after the report on the September events, and so there is likely going to be further phases of the RFC that we can discuss. Our big push in this initiative is to get what we're calling WEIM assistance energy where BAAs can receive transfers that aren't limited when they fail the RSC at an additional cost. You know, well, I shouldn't say our big push, but that's a major driver to get that in by summer. And then, as well as the other changes we're proposing, that, you know, changes to how the RSC counts in the ISO and in our tagging requirements. And, you know, to me, I don't think those are related to anything directly related, I should say, to anything we learn in the summer, the September analysis, you know, as to whether we need to change the counting rules or, you know, what qualifies for RSC and, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I know the DMM is responsible for doing the analysis and reporting and such on RSC. Just was, you know, with having had a pretty testing, trying time that we went through, and you know, it would be good to just sort of look a little bit at the performance of the resource efficiency evaluation and what that's getting accomplished with phase 2 here, you know, would have maybe helped with during that time, or not, just as a, you know, preview of what to expect once it's implemented for next summer. But just a few thoughts, so thanks for the time.
All right, thanks, Dan.
We can go ahead and unmute Kelly Wells.
Hi, Brad. It's Kelly Wells with the Western Power Trading Forum. One quick question. Hi. And it has to deal with the day-ahead market, EDAM and price formation. So I noticed on the price formation slide, you guys have it going to the board kind of mid-2023. And then EDAM, you have a briefing in December of 2022, but EDAM points to price formation. So I'm curious in terms of, I think it's the market power mitigation aspect of EDAM says, we're discussing this element of the proposal and price formation. So I'm curious as to how you guys are thinking about aligning those elements when you have two different timelines of going to the board for a briefing. So yeah, I'm curious how, like, what are you going to take to December board with EDAM if price formation hasn't been finalized yet?
Well, the approach in, like, I believe what we said in EDAM is that EDAM, the initial implementation will be, and I guess I should say most likely, just use the existing WEIM market power mitigation methodology, and that if we develop something different in price formation, then we would move to that in EDAM. We'll have to see how that works out. So this quote-unquote approved price market power mitigation methodology in price formation may not be in the very initial implementation of the EDAM.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that the discussions are going to take place in price formation, but with EDAM, and at least in terms of that part of the proposal paper and discussion, has been very, very limited. So just simply saying we're extending it to, you know, the current WEIM to EDAM, but we're going to discuss the details of price formation. That's kind of been the message. And so if there's a way to kind of align those conversations, just so we're not taking something to the board in December that hasn't been fully fleshed out or thought through with all the stakeholders in the EDAM process because of this lagged timeline. So if you can give that some more thought, and we will too, but just that the timing seems a little bit off.
Okay. I'll take that back.
We can go ahead and unmute Carolyn.
Sorry, take my hand down.
No, you're fine. You're
okay.
unmuted, Carolyn.
I believe Carolyn doesn't have a question, so we can go to Perry for GDS Associates.
Hey, it's Perry, GDS Associates. Hi, Brad. Just a super quick question right here on the price information. Yeah. Hi. You're noting some additional workshops for price formation enhancements. Just curious if you have any sense yet of what the general topic matter of those workshops would be, or what CAISO would hope to get out of those workshops.
Yeah, I should have.
I don't see an additional paper post.
Yeah, I should have. My memory's failing me again. I should have taken better notes. I believe, and you could always email James and he could let you know for sure. I believe one of them is going to talk about scarcity pricing enhancements in more detail, and then the other is going to talk about fast start pricing, and I know that James is planning to before both of those discussions talk about some proposed pricing principles and see if we can agree on pricing principles to look at or to consider when we're looking at, these first two items, scarcity pricing and fast start pricing. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the exact agendas, but that's pretty close to what I just said.
Hi, Brad. I can go ahead and help out. Yeah, so it will be on price formation principles, as you've mentioned, and price formation foundation. And then lastly, single examples of concepts clear to gain understanding of pricing concepts to slowly build of each other to introduce the complexity. So that's what I have from James. So we'll have those scheduled October 21st and December 2nd.
Okay, great.
Thanks,
guys. That was helpful. Thank you.
At this time, there's no more questions in queue, so we can go ahead and wrap up this meeting. So for the last slide we have here today, just letting everyone know our upcoming scheduled Market Performance Planning Forum will be on December 8th. We will make sure we send out a notice with agenda and slides. And if you do have any questions and related information for this particular meeting, feel free to send us over to ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com. But other than that, we have no other questions. I can go ahead and wrap up this call. But other than that, for those who have signed up for the symposium this year, thank you so much. We have quite a few long list of individuals that will be coming to our symposium. I was going to go ahead and share those slides, but unfortunately I don't have them in front of me. So we can go ahead and wrap up this call. Michelle, we can go ahead and wrap up this call. Thank you so much for those for attending and our speakers as well.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.